South Africa's unemployment rate was 32.9% in the first quarter of 2023, ranking it among the highest in the world. The recently released unemployment figures by the Statistics South Africa indicated that the unemployment rate rose again in the fourth quarter of 2022. The official unemployment rate increased by 0.2% from 32.7% in the fourth quarter of 2022 to 32.9% in the first quarter of 2023. The total number of unemployed persons was 7.933 million between January and March, up from 7.753 million in the final 3 months of the year. That is last year anyway. Mining, construction, and the manufacturing industry are among the sectors that recorded massive job losses. And according to statisticians, power crisis is having a crippling effect on households and businesses alike and is expected to put pressure on the employment status of many as some firms struggle to remain in operation. So we will be considering several factors spiking the rate of unemployment in South Africa. And joining me is Chijioke Mosu, Applied Development Microeconomist at the University of Free State, South Africa. Thank you so much, Chijioke, for joining us.
Thank you for having me and welcome to your viewers.
Now, let's look at the power crisis, which is in South Africa, which is said to be like a glue on the surface that is finding it hard to come off easily. Because you look at the reforms and different efforts of the government to provide power with having to rationalize a power supply with the issues of load shedding, blackouts, and all the likes, but it has refused to actually solve the problem of power provision to businesses in South Africa, and that is actually impacting the business environment in the country. So looking at the Southern African nation and the issue with the power crisis, is there any respite that might come to them anytime soon?
Thank you for having me once again, and that's the million-dollar question, unfortunately, and it's very serious. South Africa has been, as you rightly mentioned, having these rolling blackouts over the recent past. And of course, there are a number of initiatives by the government. For instance, recently, the president appointed an executive minister, a minister of electricity, right? Sort of to have somebody with executive authority to get a handle on this. And this is not surprising, given, for instance, some estimates indicate that load shedding cost the country about 1.2 trillion rands last year. And depending on whatever measure you use for GDP, you can see that can sometimes even reach up to a quarter of GDP in South Africa. So that is massive. And there are even some reports that the country lost about 600,000 potential jobs due to this power crisis. So it's a big problem. And when you ask whether there's a respite, one has to just be optimistic. Because when you think about it, there are fortunately a number of policy initiatives, a number of actions being sort of implemented by the government. For instance, the licensing of independent power plants. So that is one of them. And you can think of also things like the establishment of an interdepartmental National Energy Crisis Committee, which involves basically all the government departments and also the power utility ESCOM. So when you think about these, you sort of believe that, okay, something can happen. But unfortunately, also, the problem has been here for quite some time, and one is not so sure whether these will bear fruit. Of course, even if they bear any fruit, it might not be, in the short term. So my point is that the nation still needs to brace itself. And also on the plus side, there are some initiatives, for instance, trying to boost generating capacity, by sort of giving households and businesses tax incentives, tax breaks, to install solar panels and other alternative sources of energy. So these are welcome developments, but it's not very clear whether there will be respite anytime soon.
So, Chijioke, you're talking about South Africans should be optimistic about reaping the dividends of government in terms of power supply. But then some South Africans might be looking at you and be wondering, for how long would they have to keep being optimistic? For how long would they have to stay at home, most especially those who are out of jobs? For how long will those whose jobs and businesses have gone under the sea would find the means by which to raise capital to start up their businesses? And some South Africans are also looking, how long would they have to wait to have power to power their businesses, most especially the cost of production that has skyrocketed and people having to live within the means of what they have to keep their jobs afloat? For how long would they have to wait? Because when you talk about the issue of unemployment and job creation, it's a big issue with the rising unemployment rates in the country. How do you think the government would fast track the process?
No. First of all, let me correct the perception. I did not indicate that that one is going to be very optimistic. I said let's just hope. There is.
Being hopeful is being optimistic. It's just nomenclature.
there is room for optimism. I mean, okay. we can't just be pessimistic, because then we lose hope. And that's why I wanted to give the government the benefit of the doubt in terms of the fact that some of these interventions have been instituted, and then we hope that they will bear the necessary fruit. But the point you made is absolutely right. The power crisis is crippling. You can imagine we're just coming out from a pandemic, and businesses took a big hit. The economy tanked, and within this period, and then when businesses were giving a sigh of relief in terms of, okay, our operating hours are now being extended, people are gradually coming back to the offices, businesses are moving, then they are hit by this, by this tsunami, and it's a tsunami, frankly. So there is understandably, reason for pessimism here, and because, as I said, and I said earlier, if you recall, that even with all these measures being put in place, it's not likely in the short term that much will be achieved. But for me, I believe that this is a time to band together, to get together, government and the private sector. And luckily, as I said, there have been licensing of independent power plants. But it's a double-edged sword also, in the sense that the core reason why there is a power crisis is that ESCOM, the power utility, is facing serious problems. It's facing, a lot of and has crumbling infrastructure. And of course, you have issues such as entrenched interest groups that people are saying sabotaging efforts. But even without those stories, there is crumbling infrastructure. And the biggest problem is that the generating capacity is limited. And now, and the problem is now that with power cuts also, they're losing money, because you cannot pay for what you don't consume. And so it's actually a vicious cycle in this context. And that's why one hopes that these policies or these measures aimed at boosting alternative generating capacity, like, for instance, the independent power plants, and also encouraging investments in alternative sources of energy, like solar panels, will at least help to alleviate the problems. But as you rightly said, yes, it's very difficult to become optimistic in this current situation.
All right, let me just quickly chip in these statistics that I just stumbled upon. Between quarter 4 of 2022 and the quarter 1 of 2023, the number of employed people was said to have increased in 6 provinces, but then we do not have that kind of replication in other provinces in the country. So why is it that there is this uneven balance in terms of employment in the country? So what is it that these other countries who are seeing positive numbers in terms of those being employed, what are they doing as compared to what others are not doing in order to have a bit of equilibrium and to have as many people out of joblessness into being gainfully employed, as it were?
So if you look at, and as you rightly said, and that is something that needs to be clarified, that yes, the unemployment rate marginally rose between quarter 4 2022 and quarter 1 2023, right? But even at that, as you rightly said, there was about a 260,000 increase in the number of employed. And of course, the reason why there is high unemployment rate in the face of more employment numbers is that, there are more people who entered the labor market, right, and who can find work. Now, coming back to your question, you rightly mentioned 6 provinces that recorded positive growth in employment numbers and 3 that are lagging behind. And if you look at these provinces that are, that recorded positive growth, you see that, for instance, the Gauteng, where you have Johannesburg and Pretoria, the administrative capital, and Cape Town, which has been, in a beacon of prosperity over the years. These are the provinces that are historically known to perform very well in the country, to be the economic heartbeat of the country. And then when you juxtapose this spatial growth with sectoral growth, and you see that the sectors that made the greatest gains in terms of employment were things like finance, agriculture to an extent, community and social services. And the financial hubs are also in these two, Gauteng and the Western Cape, where Cape Town is. Now, some of the provinces that did very poorly are some of the poorest provinces, like the Free State, like the Northwest, for instance. And this now even makes it even more imperative for there to be a very coordinated regional integration plan in the country, because South Africa has in an unfortunate history, the history of apartheid, that segregated the population. There were what you can call clusters of excellence, but then there's also a massive area characterized by poor performance. And some economists, especially those involved in special analysis, call for a more greater integration between the centers of excellence and the not so well-off provinces, so that they can leverage, the poor provinces can leverage the advancement in these centers of excellence. And this is something that I believe that the government should think about more, and craft a coherent and well-defined policy, whether it is to encourage businesses to operate in those areas and in ways to increase demand in those provinces.
All right, Chijoge, there's another twist. According to data, between 62 and 63% of South Africans between the age of 15 and 24 are currently without jobs. And we hear that they are averse to working. So I'm wondering if that is a social malaise or a social challenge, that you have a country with that particular young population demographic not willing to be actively engaged or to be part of the labor force. So what is the issue with that? Maybe you would have to corroborate that particular stat, or you would have to debunk it.
I strongly feel that's thinking about being aversion to work for the very young is mostly erroneous. Okay. I remember many years ago I was in a seminar, and actually the presenter said that some of these stories being told about people, not about high youth unemployment, being because of demanding high wages, actually false, because that the reservation wage of the youth, which is the minimum salary that they will want to take to work, is actually below what you might call the minimum wage. The problem of youth unemployment in South Africa is a perfect storm of what you might call both supply side and demand side factors. Now, let's deal with the supply side first. You talk about the supply side where you talk about the skills that people have, okay? We know that South African educational system is very challenged. I mean, one of the most popular stories in a negative way in South African airwaves over the past week is a release of the PEAL study, which is this international study about reading competency. And it's found that about 81% of grade 4 learners, which is equivalent of, about grade 4 learners, can't read for meaning. And the number gets high, higher, gets about 50 something percent for grade 6 learners. Now you can imagine if this cumulates all the way to grade 12 when they leave secondary school and maybe are ready for the job market, you now see that there is a big skills mismatch between what employers need on the one hand and what young people have. Of course, the government has implemented a number of programs. For instance, one that we just examined recently in a paper we published is a program that they call the NARISEC program, which I think is called the National Rural Youth Service Scheme, which targets rural young people, right? So this is to capacitate them. And also what we also found there from the supply side is also that some of these youth, given that they come from disadvantaged backgrounds, they don't have your soft skills, like your leadership, networking skills, your communication skills that will get them into the labor market. And even those who want to establish their own businesses don't know even how to get integrated into the value chain. Now on the demand side, you have an economy that is not growing well.
Okay.
We have an economy that had a negative growth between Q3 of last year and Q4 of last year, right? And also then you also have what we call jobless growth in sectors that are not very labor intensive. So it's actually a perfect storm, unfortunately, of demand and supply factors. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Ujoke, for that clarification. But then we see that there's a need for the government to come up with some improved investments and intervention in the educational and the vocational sectors of the economy to deal with the issue of vocational mismatch or skill mismatch, and of course, improve the economy, build resilient businesses for the country to have a thriving economy. We thank you so much, Ujoke, for joining the conversation. Hope some other time when we call on you, you will reply or answer our call.
Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure to be with you.